Let's go! Mike Denbrock. What is the LSU offense going to look like? So, obviously, I'm going to need your help in the comment section. Do you believe Brian Kelly made the right move bringing in Denbrock to lead our offense? And we're going to do some film study on some Mike Denbrock deep dives coming up, but this right here is just a gorgeous play call, slipping the running back out to the right side and getting a nice first down against the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, as many of you know, the game didn't end up as well as we thought it was going to for Cincinnati because this first drive was so daggum excellent. The number one big bonus, and we do this on every coordinator video, much like our Matt House deep dive, the number one thing we like to do is list the pros and the cons. And obviously the first pro here is his relationship with Brian Kelly. So it's interesting as you look at Mike Denbrock's resume that he's had multiple stops with Brian Kelly. And his last stop, of course, was with Cincinnati. Another pro from Mike Denbrock is what he's done at Cincinnati is nothing short of incredible. He is a big reason why Luke Fickell's had the success that he's had. Desmond Ridder has really developed well under Mike Denbrock, who ironically is not even a quarterback's coach. He has been Cincinnati's tight ends coach along with being the offensive coordinator. Now, those are obviously all great pros, and this is something that you would like. Someone that is going to jive well with Kelly. We talk about this all the time on live streams, that it's very important that your offensive coordinator and head coach have symbiosis. They get along well. They communicate well because you must have that during the game. Here, another pro, obviously, is the tight end position. Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock, obviously a pretty illustrious tight end history. You would say Notre Dame and even Cincinnati, those two schools have really excelled at this position, and this is something Mike Denbrock is going to hopefully be able to implement and develop. And look, LSU's had really good tight ends in their own right, but Notre Dame has had the absolute best of the best. So obviously all good stuff there. And another pro for Mike Denbrock is S&P Plus. It's an advanced stat made by Bill Connolly of ESPN, and those numbers actually look pretty solid for Denbrock. They're not spectacular. We're going to dive deeper into some more basic stats in just a second, a few that are the framework of this channel. But for the most part, this is a thread from my buddy Dan Davis, who does like Denbrock a lot. It's pretty solid all around for Cincinnati's Mike Denbrock and Notre Dame's Mike Denbrock. So let's dive a little deeper into those tenures while at the same time looking at a few cons. Boom, I'm looking at you right now. Okay, this is where it's about to get crazy. Okay, because we not only have to look at the two stats that we always look at on this channel, yards per play and yards per pass attempt, we also have to apply that to what the heck actually happened with Mike Denbrock and Notre Dame. So for those that don't know, Mike Denbrock became the Notre Dame offensive coordinator in 2014. And before we look at the Cincy numbers, take a look at this down here. Obviously, in 2014, 6.1 yards per play is okay. 6.2 is a magical number that normally college football playoff teams are averaging that exact number or more in recent years. So 6.2 is where we want to be. And in 2015, the Mike Denbrock offense averaged 7.02, which is elite. 7 yards per play is really hard to do, and they did it. And then in 2016, the year that Notre Dame went 4-8 and Brian Kelly essentially fired everyone, they averaged 6.07, which was 43rd, which really isn't that bad. And then when you take a look at yards per pass attempt, it was kind of the same thing, 23rd, 15th, and 32, which is not bad whatsoever. And even if you Power 5 adjusted, once again, yards per play, at Notre Dame, Mike Denbrock versus just Power 5 competition was top 40 all his seasons and 6.89, which is third. That's a really good Power 5 adjusted number. And once again, the same thing for yards per pass attempt here as well. So before we actually look at the Cincy numbers, let's take a look at what exactly happened. So Mike Denbrock was the offensive coordinator of Notre Dame in 2014, but then in 2015, he was stripped of the offensive coordinator title and became the associate head coach. And Brian Kelly brought in a young man by the name of Mike Sanford. Now, it is up in the air who actually called the plays in 2015. According to Brian Driscoll, a friend of the channel who actually has coached college football, he has repeatedly told me that it was indeed Mike Denbrock who called the shots in 2015, even though he was stripped of his offensive coordinator title and given the title of associate head coach. Now, Brian Kelly said leading into the season that it was going to be a collaborative effort, but still, it's important to know that Denbrock was the one who called the shots because this was by far Notre Dame's best offense, and 7.02 yards per play with Deshaun Kaiser at quarterback. Once again, a very good but not elite quarterback. It's really, really good. Now, Notre Dame had some really good players. Mike McGlinchey on the offensive line, Will Fuller at wide receiver, but still 7.02 yards per play with a non-Burrow, non-Tua, non-Bryce Young type of quarterback is really freaking good. But still, nonetheless, 6.07 yards per play still isn't that bad. So while in 2016 they were still fine offensively, they did go 4-8, but there's a kicker to that. They lost all 8 of their games by 1 possession or less. So that year, Notre Dame was, in many ways, just unlucky. So maybe it was an overreaction for Brian Kelly to fire as many coaches as he decided to do, but when you have successful years prior, and then you go 4-8, you got to make everyone happy. And let's be honest, there was probably some frustration for Mike Denbrock that Brian Kelly hired Mike Sanford, and it was this weird communication because Kelly himself, for the most part, for a majority of his career up to that point, was a play caller. Just so many cooks in the kitchen. Mike Denbrock decided, look, I can go to Cincinnati where there is a defensive head coach and I have more autonomy, and I just think that's what happened in this scenario. Cincinnati yard per play numbers, once again in 2017, that's his first year. Your yard per play numbers aren't going to really be that good. It doesn't matter where you are. Being a first-year offensive coordinator is really hard. So then we go to 2018 where Desmond Ridder was a true freshman. He eventually took over the offense, and 6.12 is really good. Now, in 2019, they took a step back, but this is where I really want you to focus. These past couple of seasons, Desmond Ridder's junior and senior year, 15th and 9th in yards per play, which is really good. Not to get crazy in here. All right, so what I'm about to show you is something I spent quite a bit of time on. So if you like this kind of stuff, please subscribe and ring the bell and come by our live streams. It's a lot of fun, I promise you. So, yard per play numbers actually are really good for Mike Denbrock. As you can see, just from top to bottom, whether it was Notre Dame or Cincinnati, it's really good. Yard per play when you Power 5 adjust it, though, at Notre Dame, it was good. However, at Cincinnati, it wasn't. As you can see, the numbers drastically decreased. And that's important because you always heard the narrative surrounding Cincinnati. How would they perform against the big boys? And you saw them lose to Georgia last year, and then you saw them get beat down versus Alabama. Now, we'll go a little deeper into those individual matchups, but overall, as you can see, the numbers just go down. Another criticism of Mike Denbrock is their passing offense. While it was explosive and they did hit on big plays, it wasn't the most efficient vertical passing attack in the world. They had decent receivers. Once again, explosive plays oftentimes comes down to how good your receivers are at getting behind safeties and making guys miss. You know, once again, Alec Pierce was a good receiver. 21, Tyler is You saw him earlier in the video. He's a good receiver. They had good tight ends. But overall, you could see just the yard per pass attempt numbers are just okay. At Notre Dame, they were really good. But at Cincinnati, they were never inside the top 20. And when you Power 5 adjust the numbers, it obviously looks a lot worse. So let's do this. Let's actually take a look at Mike Denbrock's Power 5 competition games when he was at Cincinnati. So let's go through this data really quickly, okay? So Mike Denbrock versus Power 5 teams. How did he do? So this is the yards per play data. This is the yards per pass attempt data. And this is the points data, okay? Now, I'm going to show you why in just a second. This could show a major weakness in the Denbrock-Brian Kelly marriage. But let's go through this once again. We're just going to skim right through it. So I included 2018 and 2019. What's really interesting about these games, 4 of these 5 games were against bad Power 5 defenses. And you see, outside of Virginia Tech, they never really dominated bad Power 5 defenses, okay? You could see that in the yard per play data, and you can even see that a little bit in the points data. But to be honest, the Boston College game was a bowl game where their best player opted out, and it was a blowout. The UCLA performances, neither one of them were all that great, but they still found a way to win both of those games, and Virginia Tech was a really good performance. So outside of that, they also played Ohio State 2019. That was Ohio State's best team ever. 4.8 yard per play compared to 4.1 yard per play looks really good, especially considering that was Ohio State's best defense ever. The only issue in that game, as you could see, they scored 0 points. They could not finish drives. So overall, that was a crappy offensive performance as well, even though they were able to move the football some. Now, Georgia, 4.8 yards per play to 4.9 yard per play, looks okay. Yard per pass attempt, 5.6 to 6.9. That's not really that great. And 21 points when Georgia gave up 20 on the year. It looks really good, but it's not. They scored their 21 points in the first 15, 30, 31 minutes of the game. They had a long touchdown run to start the third quarter, but then after that, they were shut out the rest of the way. So they started strong, but they didn't end strong when they really needed to. Now, let's just focus on 2021, though, for right now. This is Mike Denbrock's most recent sample. Desmond Ridder in his prime, his best set of receivers, tight ends, and his best running back. And as you can see, this Indiana performance, I watched this game. It wasn't good whatsoever. 4.6 yards per play compared to 5.6 yards per play. 5.8 yards per pass attempt to 7.3 yards per pass attempt. 31 points to 33.3 points. Now, Cincinnati actually scored 38 in this game. There was a kickoff return, so that doesn't count. And a touchdown towards the end of the game on a very short field. So it was actually Cincinnati's defense that gave them good field position, which is why they scored the points that they did in that game. It just wasn't a good performance. Now, the opposite is true versus Notre Dame, where they were dominant. 6.2 yards per play versus 5.3, 9.3 yard per pass attempt, 6.8, 24 points, 19.7 points. So as you can see, that was really good. They, in fact, probably should have scored more in that game, and Denbrock called an absolutely phenomenal game. And I'm going to defend his Alabama performance. I went back, rewatched the game, working on a film study now. As you can see, 3.8 yards per play to 4.7, not good. 4.5 yard per pass attempt to 6.8, not good. 6 points to 19.2, also not good. Now, Denbrock could have done better, but, man, I really wanted Cincinnati to win this game, but Desmond Ridder played really poorly. His offensive line could not block simple twist stunts, and his receivers dropped catchable passes. So, Denbrock's play calling and overall performance, it should have been at least 14 to even 20, 21 points. But Cincinnati just did not make the 50-50 plays to make that game more competitive. This is why it's relevant when it comes to Brian Kelly, because Brian Kelly himself has really struggled when he's played the best of the best. So you're looking at a couple of graphics here. So I excluded USC and FSU because obviously they just haven't really been that great. You take out those two middling programs and just focus in on top 20 recruiters, such as the schools you see on your screen. Brian Kelly's offenses have only averaged 6 yards per play twice in 19 games versus the elite recruiters. Boom. I'm looking at you. Comment down below. Did Brian Kelly make a good hire in Mike Denbrock? Now, this is where it's going to get fun, okay? I'm going to see who actually stayed till the end of the video, because I know what a lot of you are going to say. Well, Carter, the reason why Brian Kelly's offenses didn't perform well versus the elites is because of Notre Dame's lack of talent. And that is partially true. When you get to LSU, you're going to have far better receivers in particular. You're going to have just better everything. But let's be honest, Notre Dame's put a lot of really good offensive players into the draft. You guys saw, the crazy list of tight ends. In BK's defense, he's never really had an elite quarterback, and Walker Howard's ceiling is higher than any of the quarterbacks that BK's ever coached at Notre Dame. But still, you would have liked to have seen at least one of these neutral site big game performances from Brian Kelly be above average. And that's the issue, is that there have been so many instances where his offenses just couldn't flat out do anything in those spots. You give them credit for beating Clemson the way that they did in 2020, but outside of that, it was a whole lot of meh when you actually look at it. And once again, with Denbrock, it's kind of the same thing, kinda. So, that's the thing. With the better talent, will they be better served against these elite teams? I believe that they will. And it's no mystery that it's the talent more than the scheme that makes coaches. So I understand it sounds like, I'm skeptical of Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock, and the opposite's actually true. I think they're really gung-ho and hungry to win a national championship and work with the stable of thoroughbreds that LSU has to offer. They know that they're walking into the most talented, resource-filled school that they've ever been a part of. So that excites me. They're going to be imaginative. They're going to think, how can we actually get over the top versus these elite teams? So don't take what I said as a criticism of Brian Kelly. It's just a reality, right? You guys saw the yard per play data. A lot of you have watched these playoff neutral site games not go the way of BK and not go the way of Mike Denbrock. So that's the thing. When they get to that spot, when they play versus these elite teams, can they get it done? And I think they will. I think if they get to that spot, once again, if you have guys like Kayshawn and whoever else down the road, you can get over the top with these two running the show. But we have to wait and see if that actually does happen. That's the fun thing about it, baby. Let's go. Let's go, BK. Let's go, Mike. Let's go. Let me know what you guys think down below. Once again, our deep dives, they do take a lot of time. So if you want to drop a Venmo, Cash App, anything at Carter the Power, it's always greatly appreciated. Now, if you want another deep dive such as this one, boom, Madhouse right here. It is Power Hour LSU. Boom. Well, I think we're doing pork chops tonight. Let's